He walked into the police station and said 5 words that made detectives' blood run cold. "I can show you more. More bodies. More victims. More than anyone imagined." He didn't just confess to 1 murder. He confessed to 6 more. And then he offered something truly horrifying: a guided tour. "I'll take you to them," he said calmly. "I know exactly where they are." One by one, he led police through the streets of Gary, Indiana, a city with over 10,000 abandoned houses. He pointed to decaying structures like someone pointing out landmarks on a vacation. "That one," he'd say. And inside, behind broken doors and shattered windows, detectives would find another body, another woman, another victim the world had forgotten. 7 women, all strangled, all hidden in buildings that society had already abandoned, just like the women themselves. But here's what makes this case truly terrifying. Vann didn't stop talking. He mentioned other cities: Chicago, California, Texas, Wisconsin, Minnesota. He told investigators about victims going back 20 years. He said when he felt the urge, he'd simply board a train or bus, travel to another state, and find someone new. Random strangers. Wrong place. Wrong time. "How many?" detectives asked. His answer haunts them to this day. "A lot more than you think." This wasn't just a serial killer. This was a man who understood something most people never realize: which victims society ignores, which neighborhoods police don't watch, and how to move through the cracks of America's broken system. And the question that keeps investigators awake at night is simple but horrifying: how many more are still out there? Darren Deon Vann was born on March 21, 1971, in Gary, Indiana. He came into a world that was already dying. The city that once roared with steel mills and factory jobs was shutting down. One by one, businesses closed, workers left. Families moved away, searching for opportunities elsewhere. The buildings they left behind just stood there, empty, rotting, becoming shells of what they used to be. Young Darren grew up surrounded by this decay. Violence was normal. Gangs controlled the streets. Substances were sold openly. Shootings happened regularly. Women were exploited without anyone asking questions. This was the environment that shaped him. Not one single trauma, but years of watching misery treated as normal. Years of learning that some lives matter less than others. Nobody who knew him as a child remembers him as special or different. Teachers did not notice him. Neighbors could not recall specific details about him. He was just another kid in a dying city. He learned early that being forgettable was an advantage. Being invisible meant avoiding consequences. So he became a human shadow. Someone you might pass on the street without ever remembering his face. In 1991, Vann joined the United States Marine Corps. This should have been a turning point. The military breaks people down and rebuilds them with discipline and structure. But for Vann, it did not work. He was discharged in 1993 with an other-than-honorable discharge. Even the Marines, an institution designed to transform men, wanted nothing to do with him. He returned to civilian life more disconnected and dangerous than before. As an adult, Vann tried to create a normal appearance. He married a woman who was nearly 30 years older than him. It was not about love or genuine connection. It was about having a cover, a facade of stability while the rest of his identity remained empty. The marriage fell apart quietly, without drama, without emotional impact. It just dissolved like everything else in his life. Vann moved on, never forming real bonds, never integrating into any community. April 6th, 2004. Gary, Indiana. This is when Vann first appears in official criminal records. He went to a house demanding to see a woman he believed was inside. When he did not get what he wanted, he left and returned with a red gasoline container. He poured fuel around the property and threatened to light it with a lighter in his hand. A witness tried to reason with him, but Vann made it clear this was about control and leverage. He demanded $7,000 to release the situation. Police arrived and arrested him for residential entry and intimidation. He served time on a probation violation. Then he disappeared back into Gary. This incident was the first recorded sign of the violence he would fully develop later. But nobody saw it as a warning. Nobody connected this incident to what he would become. 3 years later, in 2007, Vann was in Austin, Texas. Another incident. Another woman. Court records show a 25-year-old female entered his apartment. She later told police he attacked her violently, threw her down, choked her, harmed her, told her he could end her life. This was not random chaos. This was targeted violence in a controlled space. A pattern was forming. Vann pleaded guilty to aggravated assault. He was sentenced. He served time in a Texas prison. But prison does not fix certain types of people. It just gives them time to think, time to plan, time to harden without distraction. Research shows that some offenders use prison as a pause button, not as a deterrent. They come out more refined in their methods. He was released in July 2013. After leaving Texas custody, Vann returned to Lake County, Indiana, and registered as an offender. He was classified as low risk. That designation would become one of the most catastrophic mistakes in this entire case, because the system believed he was low risk. They thought he was manageable. They had no idea what he had truly become during those years in prison. No idea that he was about to escalate into something far more dangerous. October 17th, 2014. Africa Hardy was 19 years old. She had recently moved to the Chicago area after graduating from high school. She was trying to build independence and stability in her life. That night, she arranged a meeting through an online platform where she advertised her services. She traveled to a Motel 6 located on East 179th Street in Hammond, Indiana, for the appointment. Throughout the evening, she exchanged messages with her friend and business partner who monitored her safety from a distance. The friend later explained that Afrika's communication rhythm suddenly changed. Normal messaging turned into short responses, then silence. When Afrika stopped answering her phone completely, her friend became worried. She and another person drove to the motel to check on her. When they entered the room, they immediately found Afrika deceased in the bathtub. Her body showed clear signs of strangulation. Red marks around her neck, evidence of a struggle, a torn protection wrapper on the bathroom floor, a broken fingernail on the tile. Everything pointed to a violent confrontation before her passing. Surveillance video from the motel parking lot captured a dark-colored Jeep arriving during the exact appointment time frame. A male suspect was seen exiting the vehicle and walking toward Afrika's rented room. Detectives conducted a reverse lookup on the phone number used to arrange the appointment. It traced back to a residence in Gary, Indiana. A blue Jeep registered to someone's sister was located at that address. The vehicle matched the Jeep captured on the motel security footage. Within hours, police arrested Darren Deon Vann. Once in custody and advised of his rights, he confessed during a recorded interview. According to official documents, Vann admitted that he strangled Afrika first with his hands and then with a cord. He said that after she passed away, he placed her body in the bathtub, left the room, and drove away in the blue Jeep. This confession was supported by overwhelming physical evidence, phone records, surveillance video, items found inside the Jeep tied to the original appointment. The coroner later determined that the cause of passing was strangulation, followed by additional compression. The presence of the torn wrapper and signs of struggle confirmed that Afrika had fought back against her attacker. This was the moment law enforcement finally caught Darren Deon Vann. The digital trail, the vehicle match, his direct confession, all created an immediately prosecutable case. But what happened next shocked everyone. Within less than 48 hours of Afrika Hardy's body being discovered, Vann did something unexpected. He started talking, and he kept talking. He told detectives about 6 more women. He said he knew exactly where they were, and he offered to show police the locations. Tiara Beatty was 28 years old, a young mother trying to stabilize her life in Gary. On January 13th, 2014, she met up with a friend near the east side. Sometime after that moment, she simply vanished. She did not come home. She did not call anyone back. She disappeared into the thousands of abandoned structures that dotted Gary's landscape. Vann knew those buildings better than anyone. He used them as his personal disposal system. Beatty was not found for 9 months. On October 19th, 2014, after Vann was arrested, he led police to an abandoned residence at 1800 East 19th Avenue. Inside that structure, investigators found her remains. The place was filled with trash and debris. It felt less like a house and more like a sealed tomb. This single recovery location explained everything. Vann did not need rural areas or rivers to hide his victims. He used abandoned urban buildings, and Gary had more vacant housing than almost any major city in the country. He turned urban decay into his perfect disposal strategy. Tanya Gatlin was 27. Sonia Billingsley was 53. Both women disappeared in early 2014. There's no clear moment when they crossed into Vann's path. But that ambiguity is exactly why they became vulnerable. In this city, women could vanish in silence, and no system raised alarms. 9 months later, on October 19th, 2014, officers entered a decomposing structure at 413 East 43rd Avenue after Vann directed them there. Inside this exact building, they found 2 bodies. One was Tanya Gatlin. The other was Sonia Billingsley. Vann used this house like storage, placing remains inside a structure as if he assumed nobody would ever question why these houses stood empty for years. Autopsy findings confirmed both women passed away from strangulation. There were no weapons involved. Vann preferred manual control. He preferred the personal nature of taking oxygen from a living person with his own hands. Christine Williams was 36, a mother of 4 children. Her disappearance did not just leave emptiness, it destroyed her family's stability. February 2014, Gary, Indiana. Christine went missing in a way that felt identical to the others. Quietly, without the world responding. People who knew her said she was trying to get her life back on track. But like many women in Gary at that time, she lived close to the margins. And when you exist near the margins, predators find you first. Vann took Christine into another vacant structure at 4330 Massachusetts Street in Gary. This building had stopped being a home years before he ever opened that door. There were no witnesses, no neighbors listening, no functioning utilities, nothing recording time or movement. Inside that environment, Christine Williams passed away by strangulation. Her body remained inside that location for months. Authorities would not find her until October 19th, 2014. Her autopsy confirmed strangulation, consistent with every other victim he was connected to. Tracy Martin was 41. She had a presence people remembered. Her sudden absence caused confusion among those who knew her. June 26th, 2014. Gary, Indiana. Tracy Martin was reported missing. For months, nothing surfaced, no leads, and the city just absorbed another disappearance the same way it absorbed all the others. Quietly, Vann led Tracy into another abandoned building at 2200 Massachusetts Street. Another shell of a structure still standing, because demolition in Gary moved slower than the rate of collapse. Inside those walls, Tracy Martin passed away the same way the others did. And the silence of that method makes it even more disturbing. No loud sounds, nothing that travels beyond the walls. You can harm someone in complete silence, and the outside world hears nothing. The autopsy confirmed strangulation. Vann did not act for attention. He acted for psychological power, his control, his dominance, his ability to decide who continued breathing. Aneth Jones was 35. Her name still echoed in worried conversations because when she vanished, people noticed immediately that something was wrong. October 8th, 2014. Gary, Indiana. Aneth Jones disappeared only 9 days before the incident that would finally expose Darren Deon Vann permanently. She was last seen in Hammond, and like the others, she walked into his orbit without realizing she was entering a trap. He had spent an entire year harming women inside abandoned structures, and nobody had intervened. Nobody had identified him as a potential threat. After she vanished, her family reported her missing immediately. They did not delay. They did not assume she had left voluntarily. They knew. But still, she stayed missing. When Darren Deon Vann was finally locked behind bars and facing the justice system, prosecutors had one major advantage. He had led them to the bodies himself. He gave them the timeline. He provided geographic proof. He confirmed his methods. Indiana prosecutors understood this case was not about proving guilt. It was about determining the sentence outcome. Vann was charged with multiple counts. The state openly positioned capital punishment as a possibility. In Indiana, that was not an empty threat. It was leverage. Prosecutors used it exactly the way the system is designed, to force cooperation. His attorneys knew they were not arguing innocence. They were arguing for life instead of execution. As negotiations advanced, everyone involved understood something important. Life imprisonment guaranteed that all confirmed victims remained legally documented. The other option, if appealed for decades, risked complications and potential reversals. So Vann entered an agreement. He pleaded guilty. He avoided the death penalty. The judge read the sentence like a final chapter being closed. He was sentenced to multiple life terms without any possibility of parole. Darren Deon Vann, whose earliest crimes were protected by his ability to remain invisible, ended his journey not as someone moving freely through abandoned buildings, but as a prisoner locked in a system that finally saw him. He will never walk outside those walls again. But the story does not end there. Because during his confession to police, Vann said something that haunts investigators to this day. He claimed he had victims in other states, many other states. He mentioned Illinois, California, Texas, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan. And when asked specifically about Chicago, he said there were a lot. a lot more than anyone knew. He told detectives that when he felt himself losing control, he would get on a train or bus. He would travel far from his family, far from people who knew him, and he would find victims in other cities. Random people, wrong place, wrong time. He said these incidents went back decades, possibly 20 years or more. Investigators analyzed unsolved cases. They found patterns. Strangulation victims in Chicago, bodies found near train lines, women who disappeared during the exact years Vann was moving between states. Share this story to spread awareness about the victims society forgets. Subscribe for more true crime stories, and stay alert because evil hides in plain sight, and we never know when danger might strike next.